Today I'm talking with Burl Harmon and Robert Wehnert. Both served in the 450th Bomb Group in Italy during World War II. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us. Burl, could you please tell me when you joined the military? Was it before or after Pearl Harbor?
It was after Pearl Harbor. I was drafted in March of 1943.
Was the draft something that you saw coming?
Only in a letter from the draft board.
That makes sense.
But then I was chosen to be with an aviation mechanics group. I had no choice in that. I filled out a quota, and then they sent me through the following year. I was sent to various training camps for aviation mechanics to get acquainted with the airplane and to get acquainted with the various gunnery stations.
How about you, Mr. Wehnert? When did you join the military? Was it before or after after Pearl Harbor, and were you drafted as well?
No, it was after Pearl Harbor. I was a senior in high school, and the Army Air Corps had a program called the Air Cadet Program.
Right.
And with it, you could bypass, at that time, you had to be a college graduate to be a pilot. But they were now running short, so they went to high school. And then for 6 months, you couldn't go in until you were 17 and a half. So that first 6 months, I used to jump on the Long Island Railroad after school and go out to Mitchell Field, where they had courses in navigation, meteorology, and flight basics. So the minute that 6 months was over, then I went in.
For you, Burl, did you know that you were interested in flying when you were young, like Robert was?
No, I couldn't even drive a car. I had no interest. It was not my choice. I was just picked to fill out the quota for aviation mechanic training, to work on the airplane, to become acquainted with the B-24.
You must have been mechanically inclined then, if at that young age they were, you could fix airplanes. That's pretty impressive. And Robert, it sounded like you knew that you wanted to be involved in aviation somehow at a young age, right?
I had never been up in an airplane. And airplanes in those days, of course, were very scarce. You'd see them fly by once in a while, mostly biplanes. And so I had never been in the air. So some people used to say, why did you join the Air Force instead of the Navy or the Army? I said, well, I always wanted to be in the air, whether I had been or hadn't. So unfortunately, I didn't get through to pilot training because they say that I failed depth perception. So I to this day wonder if that was true or not, or whether they needed gunners more than they needed pilots.
Who knows, right?
Good thinking, Robert.
So you were both stationed in Italy, correct? Can you tell me?
Yes, I was.
Robert, about what was your day-to-day life when you were stationed in Italy like?
What did you say again? The one fallacy I have is hearing. I have hearing problems.
That's okay, no problem. When you were stationed in Italy, what was the day-to-day life like in Italy?
Well, it was really hard to explain almost. Now, we first moved into a barracks. You had a choice. It was an old Italian bear base. And they had Italian barracks, which held 60 members, or there would be 6 crews. There's 10 crews, of gunners. And we thought that was the best because it had inside plumbing, it had heat, it had all the facilities that you wanted. Unfortunately, the bad part of it is you got to know all these guys because you didn't fly every day. You spent a lot of time with other crews. And what would happen if a crew didn't come back from a mission at 7 o'clock that night? They would come in with bags and pick up all their belongings and put them in the bags and take them away. And this got kind of hard because you got to be knowing these guys. And then with the second time that happened, we figured, well, it's another one. Then a third time, we decided, hey, let's move in a tent where we're brothers. There's 6 guys. We're going to be in a small tent. Unfortunately, it's not, you have to have it heated. You had to have a little gas stove there, a gasoline stove. And so that's why we moved out and we became brothers. That's how you lived. Each guy, you spent so much time together, you were brothers.
How about you, Burl? Your time in Italy, what was day-to-day life for you there?
I was assigned to a flight crew, and we were stationed. There were 10 crews in an old building, something like what Robert is speaking of. But we were in tents there and canvas beds. And it is, as Robert mentioned, you got very well acquainted with the crews. The officers were in a different area, and the enlisted men were in this old building that housed about 10 of the crews. But it was we flew on an average of one mission one day after every third day. I'll get it said, every third day, and then in between we could go to the little village. They had there was a village about 10 minutes. They'd let us ride in a GI truck. And we would take our uniforms and have them, one of the ladies in this village, to launder our uniforms. But it was just kind of time on our hands. We didn't have much. Every evening they would show a movie, so we had free movies, and we. Were fed in a mess hall, and I became acquainted with one thing, with the poverty that Hitler had left by pulling out and taking everything that was edible with him. Then, but we were served meals and. But as I said, we flew about every third day.
So on those missions, I know you both flew multiple missions. Is there any one that you particularly stands out to you, to either of you? We could go with Burl.
On one mission, there was an anti-aircraft hit one of the planes and in fact hit our plane and took out one engine, and we were in squadrons of 7, so we had to drop out of the squadron, and that's when the German fighters could pick on us. But the tragic part of it was a navigator suffered a wound across it from his knee to his hip in the quadricep, and he turned as white as a sheet, but he didn't pass out. But we had to drop out of the formation, and we were fearful that we were the targets of the German fighter planes, but we were not. We made it back home, back to the base there at Manduria, the 720th Squadron, and this comprised our day. We flew once every third day.
Wow, that's a pretty intense one there. They had somebody was backup navigator, or he was able to continue as his duties?
He sat up, as I said. He was struggling not to pass out, but the bombardier and I treated his wound. The only first aid kit that the Air Corps provided had adhesive tape and, would you believe this, sulfa powder. That's the only thing. So we did the best we could to bind up his wound, and until we got back. And of course, we had radio contact with our base, and they had an ambulance waiting for him. But that was the highlight, and the most dangerous mission that I flew on.
How about you, Robert? Do you have an experience that's relatable to that?
As long as the mission didn't have a lot of flack, you did have some missions that had very little flack. But I think the thing I remember is the first time we saw 262s, which is the German jet fighter. And it was unbelievable what we saw when that thing can maneuver and climb and speed, and it was kind of jaw-dropping.
Right.
Wow. So did you, when you were on your missions, for both of you, was obviously there's fear when you're going into any type of life-threatening. Was that something you felt just kind of you didn't think about because you couldn't at the time? You had to do what the job entailed at that time, or was it just something outside of your own body? You just did it, and you were scared later. Could you feel the fear constantly when you were flying over the enemies?
Yes, going into the bomb run, that was the time when I was really fearful. We kept, you could never hear anything. It just like when the anti-aircraft shots were fired, when they exploded near our formation, it sounded just like the wind, but no sound. There's nothing to reverberate. So, but yes, I was scared. But then after that, when I got on the 2 days off, I didn't worry about it much. We just sort of knew that we were going to be in harm's way.
There's something that Robert mentioned earlier, the bond. I think you both mentioned the bond of being close together with the rest of your flight crew, that I think when everyone has that common goal and that common fear, that it's helpful, right? We all are feeling the same thing, so maybe it makes it a little bit less than you think it should be. Robert, how did you feel when you were flying, when you were going on missions? Did you feel the fear constantly, or was it kind of the same way as Burl?
One thing I always remember are takeoffs. When everybody was lined up ready for takeoffs, that's when you had a little time to think, because you had to be one after the other, as everybody knows. They had to get everybody up in the air in a hurry. And you knew at that time, believe it or not, that the planes were overloaded, really. The B-24J was almost 2.5 tons heavier than the B-24D, and yet it still had the same engines, so it didn't generate any more horsepower in getting off and on. Maybe you might carry a little less bomb load, And the only really thing that was made a difference is instead of the ceiling of the J being 32,000 feet, it had dropped down to 28,000 feet. That was the ceiling with the J. Those I remember. So it was quite a thing. You used to say, "Why is the bottom of my plane olive drab?" And we used to kid the pilot because at the end of the runway, we had a 200-year-old olive orchard. And so we used to kid him that he used to go through that on takeoff. So it was kind of a fun thing we used to have.
Robert, for us that aren't in aviation, what does drab mean?
Yes, well, the bottoms of the planes, our planes were of course silver on the bottom and khaki color on the top. It wasn't until toward the middle of 44, I think, that all the aircraft that was coming through was silver. The reason for it, one of the reasons was it could save weight, because the paint on a plane is probably maybe 250 pounds, plus the effort to paint it in production and so on and so forth. So, and they didn't need the olive colored tops anymore.
Got it. So what lessons do either of you think, how about Burl, that the modern military can learn from those who served in World War II?
Well, things were very basic, very basic in those days when you look back at it. It wasn't a science in those days. You know, we lost more planes than we lost to the enemy through pilot error, equipment malfunction, or things like that, weather, all kinds of things, more than we lost to the Germans or Japanese. Which is, saying that the technology at that time wasn't the best in the world, but it's what we had.
Right. Burl, what do you think that the modern military can learn from World War II veterans?
They need to pay close attention and to follow the procedure, usually dictated by the pilot. On a bomb run, for example, out of the 7 planes in a squadron, the lead plane, the bombardier in the lead plane, would open the bomb bay doors, and the other 4 bombardiers opened theirs, and they watched, and when he triggered the bomb release, they also did the same thing. But we were spaced in a 7-plane squadron in such a way, of course, we could get rid of the bombs. And then I remember once we had released our bombs and we banked away to leave the target, I like Robert. I wished for no flak, but there would be flak, and it came up just like black smoke, and as I mentioned a while ago, wind. It would just go swoosh. But if it hit, of course, the plane simply would disintegrate, and this is a very, very sobering kind of experience to see a plane. And then the waist gunners were assigned to count the parachutes that got out of a plane that was hit. And this was part of the sobriety of the war. I mean, the fact that some of your friends are not going to come back.
That reminds me of what Robert said earlier about being in the squad bays and understanding that other flight crews should be back at 7, and if they're not, someone is coming to pick up their stuff, and you don't even have to be told what happened to them. You understand that
Right.
that happened, and that is just it's an eerie feeling to even think about that.
I might interject one thing. We halfway through our missions, we were given a 3-day pass, and we were given a pass to go to from Manduria, the air base, up to Rome, and that was the closest to being a tourist I ever had in terms of the military. We were hauled around the first part of the day, the first day that we were there, in a GI truck, and they took us to places like the Colosseum and the Appian Way up in Rome, and we were there for 3 days. They gave us an extra day, the 4th day, and we came back. And I have a story about that coming back too. But we found a fellow who could speak pretty good English, and an older man in Italy, there in Rome, and he was our guide. And so in the afternoon, he took us around to the Colosseum and to the jail where I think a couple of the prophets, the early Paul and Silas, the disciples, and of course this was very troubling to imagine of people being sent out there into the Colosseum and then attacked by starved animals. But when we came back from our 3-day pass, the assistant, the operations officer and his assistant, one of them one day would assign the crews, and the other day would assign the crews to fly the missions. Well, one of them, I don't know which, knew we were back, and they or thought we were back, so they I'll get this right. They assigned a new crew to the plane. This Robert was mentioning the Model J. Ours was a Model H. It was one of the lighter planes, apparently. But anyway, we came back, and the one who the operation officer or his assistant didn't know we were back, so they assigned a new crew to our Model H B-24, and the anti-aircraft fire blew one wing off, and if I recall correctly, only 3 chutes got out, so the rest of them perished. And I felt that God must have had something in mind for me to get through all of this, and it turned out I wouldn't be here talking to you if it were true. But this was very, very disturbing. The next day, we were assigned in a different ship, but that was as close a call as I felt that I ever had.
That one, that's probably something you've thought about for
years.
80 years now. Wow.
That's right.
You wow. So did you realize at the time the great service you were doing to not only our country but to the world?
No, I'm 19 years old. I wasn't quick enough to keep a diary or write down, because we were told the same fellow who was wounded, the navigator, was a great one. We were on a first name basis. Our crews were, and this is so unmilitary. But in the Air Corps, we were a bonded group of 10 men, And one of the navigator, he smoked cigars, and none of us smoked cigars, and he liked those. He said, "I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you guys." He said, "Now you know what not to write home. That should the letter fall into German hands." But he said, "Bring me your envelopes, and I'll censor your mail." What he meant was he would sign his name on the in the upper left-hand corner. He would censor the mail. Well, of course, we never did violate the problems, but we kept him supplied in cigars. He was a big, tall fellow, and we were just, as I said, we were just very closely bonded together.
How about you, Robert? Did you understand what was going on in the world at that time? Or were you kind of, I know you were young as well, and I think it sounds like you were even younger than Burl was. Maybe it's more day to day, or did you understand the big picture at that time?
Yes, well, one thing is good that you were young. I think when you're young, you really don't really understand everything, and you kind of feel you're bulletproof. Mm-hmm. Even though I don't know if anybody ever felt that way or not, but you actually do feel bulletproof.
Right.
I think it's just an attitude that you might just need to have.
I think if you had a wife and family at home, there might be different thoughts going through your mind. At that time, I was so young. Everybody in our crew was about 18 or 19. The old guy in the crew was the pilot. We used to call him Dad. He was 22 years old.
Oh, 22.
So everybody seemed like it was a young war.
That's an extremely young crew. Very young. So you just felt like you were doing your job, both of you, right? You didn't feel kind of like heroes, even though I think that's how I know that's how we all see you. And when you returned, how were you greeted?
Yes, well, when I came home, I never wanted to talk about the war. It was something you had been to, you had been part of it, and it was like a movie. You'd go.
Nope. Looks like Robert might froze up a little bit. Burl, how about you? How were you greeted when you returned home?
When I returned home, I had. It's in my book, by the way. Here is my book. I wrote this book when I was. I used to after I married Nanette, I would tell her stories about an incident. She said, "Why don't you sit down and write this? I won't remember it, and I want to get the details right." Well, one story led to another, so I finally wound up with a series of stories about. But I came back, I found out that my parents had gotten a divorce, and I didn't have a home. Ooh. But I did. I managed to finish out 2 years of college, and over a period of time after, fast forwarding, Nanette encouraged me to write these things down, and so I have online. I have this book, Combat Missions.
Hold the book up on me so people can see it.
Yeah, here it is, and
it can be purchased.
I will definitely check that out.
It can be purchased.
We were sure to check it out. Robert, you froze up a little bit earlier, but I wanted to get back to you on how were you greeted when you returned home?
How you were greeted when you came home?
Yes, it was strange. Yes, we were. And yet, you know, the thought that nobody talked about the war, really, I remember. And the first reunion I went to, I was 85 years old before I went to a reunion. I began to think maybe I should get to know these people. And for the last 6 years, I've been a member of the Lone Star Flight Museum here in Houston. And I feel that I talk to different people. I have most of the people that come in, there's little kids and there's grown-ups and so forth. And most of them had a grandfather or somebody in the family that was in service. They might not have been in the Air Corps, but those that were in the Air Corps, any of them say, you know, the problem was we never got to talk about the war. We don't know really what he did because he never talked about it. And I said, well, you know, they seem to feel better if I kind of somewhat hold their hand and talk about different things, whatever I think they might want to hear about. And I feel it's my duty as a veteran, because there's only about 90,000 of us left out of 16 million. The minute we're gone, it's going to be just a memory in a book like the First World War. So I feel we should get out and do what we can. That's what I have to do it for, and it also keeps me out of dark and dingy bars.
Well, that's good. I know the younger generations like mine and before, we love hearing your stories from World War II and Korea and Vietnam as well. That kind of leads me into our last question here. What would you tell a young person just entering the military today? What wisdom would you share with them?
Well, I personally, I think we have a lot of people at the museum, a lot of kids. We accept kids in teaching things like flying. We have, I'm trying to remember some of the terms, but as young as 14 years old, and we graduate, I don't know how many people get into the Air Force and go to the Air Force academies. So we try to get people, because to me, joining the Air Force would be the greatest thing you can do as a young kid. You get your education, you get to do what you want. It's a great thing, I think. But the one thing that I hate to see the way the world is going today. I don't mean to get into, but it's not like it was in 1940s. When there were just one thought. Everybody had one thought in mind. That was to win the war. Mm-hmm. And if it hadn't been for the women coming out of the homes and into factories and becoming, so say, Rosie the Riveters, and we'd have never accomplished what we did, really. It was a war that was won by outproducing the enemy. We outproduced Japan, Germany, and not only outproduced them, but was by many times. And that's the way the country was. Unfortunately, we seem to be divided today. There seems to be one side against the other side, which to me is very disheartening.
Yes, sir.
I don't know how anybody else feels.
Burl, do you have any words of wisdom for any young folks joining the military today?
I would say that if if there is an opportunity for them to choose a field in which there's considerable merit in joining the military service and giving that kind of service to the communities, to the nation, to the world. I'm very much interested, as Robert was saying, of getting. It's such a different world now. We need to consider what the values are that we would like to preserve, and this is one of the things that we might be able to do by joining the military service, and if not, at least joining in the community to try to preserve what we hold, the values that we hold dear, particularly the values that we hold dear, and to be accepting of one another, and rather than wringing our hands to get busy. And one of the values that we have is that we need to be able to make choices.
Yes, I agree with
to vote.
Yes,
to have
I'm
the
a firm
right
believer, probably, that every kid out of high school, the minute he leaves high school, should go in the Army or military service for 1 year.
At least,
To me,
right.
it would make them think. It would have them time to think. I don't think the average student today, when you go to grammar school, high school, all of a sudden you're in college, you don't really have time to think or see the world from what it's like in a different atmosphere. You've been used to living with your family. To me, it's the best thing. I don't think we'll ever see it in this country, although most countries do. But I think it would be the greatest thing a child could have happen to them, would be 1 year in service.
Well,
Before
you both
college.
have some great advice for not only young people joining the military, but just young people in general. I really appreciate you both joining us today. It was an honor to speak with you and hear your stories. I look forward to getting your book, Burl. And Robert, if you decide to write a book, let us know, and we will get your book as well. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Well, thank you, and nice seeing everybody, and it was a pleasure as far as I'm
Thank you.
concerned.
Glad to get acquainted with you, Robert. And Josh, you have been a gracious host. We appreciate
sir.
that.
Thank you.